everybody, and welcome to Includes podcast presented by Proximal Solutions. Before we go into our episode today, there is something that I really need to share with you guys, because if you don't know, you need to know. So if you have not heard about Anchor, guys, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. And I said it is the easiest way because number one, it is free. Yes, it is free. There are also creation tools that are going to allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. It does not get any easier than that. But wait, there is more. Anchor is also going to distribute your podcast for you so that it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. You can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It is everything really that you need to make a podcast, and it is all in one place. So do me a favor, go in, download the free Anchor app, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Includes podcast presented by Proximal. I am your host Marlegny Mourino, and I am so excited and thrilled to be here with you today in episode number 5. Today we're going to be discussing, and I'm going to say this one more time. I know I said it in compliance, I know I said it in the FQHC episode, but something that it's also near and dear to my heart, and that is auditing. So we're going to talk about the definition of auditing, the goal of medical auditing today, the reasons to perform the audit, the responsibilities of an auditor, the audit scope, process, and sampling, the audit process, the type of audit, just everything, all the ins and outs that you need to know about medical auditing. Now, the compliance episode was an actual request that I received from my really good friend, Sarah Reagan. And after doing the compliance episode, the request was last month, well, since we did compliance, can we also do auditing? So I did not give Sarah a shout out for the compliance, but I needed to make sure that I had, that I put that out there because it was a request that she made for us. So now on to auditing. So why audit? What is an audit? And just like compliance, you might have different definitions of what an audit is or why you should audit. So we know that the business of medicine is highly complex. We know that we are in it every day. It is ever changing. Ever changing, and it's also very tightly regulated. So hospitals, clinics, and private physicians practices must follow, all those issued to stay in business, and must follow those regulations and laws to be able to stay in business. The only way to determine if the coding of a service is appropriate is to compare it against the medical record documentation. So in other words, quality healthcare is based on accurate and complete clinical documentation in the medical record. So the best way to improve the clinical documentation and also the livelihood of any healthcare organization is through medical record audits. Auditing not only plays a vital role in keeping healthcare organizations in compliance with the necessary legal requirement and regulations, but it also helps in improving the quality of patient care and services. And that is sometimes the one thing that, we don't think about right away. It's like, yeah, we need to make sure that we're in compliance, but by auditing, we're also helping improving the quality of patient care and also services. Medical audits are necessary to determine areas that require improvement and corrections. They entail conducting internal and external reviews of coding accuracy, policies, and procedures to ensure that we are running an efficient and also a liability-free operation. Overall, guys, a quality audit is going to be able to provide with observations and also recommendations to address ways to control costs, improve the quality of services, as I mentioned already, and ensure compliance with the latest regulation, which I mentioned are ever changing. So, what is the goal of medical auditing? I mean, if you are not convinced yet, the goals of an audit are to provide efficient and a better delivery of care and to improve the financial health of the medical provider and healthcare organization. Medical record audits specially target and evaluate procedural and diagnosis code selection as determined by physician documentation. Once areas of weakness are revealed through an audit, you can present the audit findings and identify opportunities for training. And even when we talked about compliance, we talked about the importance of training. So you're going to hear that a lot from me about how important it is to make sure that your staff is properly trained, that you are properly trained, because that means that you are going to have the tools that you need to be successful. So again, identify opportunities for training within the healthcare organization. So one of the things that we sometimes confuse when, we are in the office is that we are confusing the terms with auditing and monitoring. So we're either confusing them or either using them interchangeably, but we need to understand that these two concepts are different. So auditing is the work. This is the process of examining the medical record, verifying information, and gathering baseline information to identify potential risk area or just to identify risk areas that we currently have. Now, monitoring, this is part of your action plan. So monitoring is the ongoing process of reviewing coding practices and the adequacy of the documentation and code selection. So ongoing process, this is the ongoing process. So what are the reasons to perform an audit? And this is, guys, straight from the AAPC. They list in their website the reasons to perform an audit, and they are to determine outliers before large payers find them in their claim softwares and request an internal audit be done, to protect against fraudulent claims and billing activity, to reveal whether there is a variation from national averages due to inappropriate coding, insufficient documentation, or lost revenue, to help identify and correct problem areas before insurance or government payers challenge inappropriate coding, to help prevent governmental investigational auditors like the RAC audits or the recovery audit contractors or zone program integrity contractors, which is also, we call it ZPICs, from knocking on our doors, okay? Also, another reason is to remedy undercoding, bad unbundling habits, and code overuse, and to bill appropriately for documented procedures, to identify reimbursement or payment deficiencies and opportunities for appropriate reimbursement, to stop the use of outdated and incorrect codes for procedures. So those are the reasons that the AAPC list on why we should perform an audit in our offices or with our practice or with our providers. What is the medical auditor responsibility? Well, if you Google it, you're going to have just a laundry list of things that they do, just the same as like the compliance officer. So as a medical auditor, so let me simplify it for you. As a medical coding auditor, we check medical coding and billing information for accuracy, suspicious activity, and compliance with healthcare regulations. Our responsibility requires us to review medical data and document any areas where the medical coding could improve in terms of accuracy and efficiency. Our duties also include reviewing records of patients to make sure that there is documentation for each of the items that were billed. Although, this is something that I want to make sure that I mention, although we work in the medical coding and billing department, our primary focus is going to be regulation and compliance. So it's not going to be coding and payment. It's going to be regulations and compliance. We conduct ongoing record audits to verify coding and grouping accuracy, perform, again, here's that word again, educational sessions for coding specialists, documentation specialists, and also our physicians. We act as a liaison for electronic physician QA application. report on coding and grouping accuracy based on audit results, and we also serve as an expert resource for all of the coding staff. I remember in a previous live, this is something that I was doing, and I was a resource for the coding staff. When they had questions, they would ask me if I didn't know the answer. I would tell them, hey, I don't know the answer. Let me research it for you. Let me get with the coding manager, especially when I started, because I didn't know all of the different policies that the organization had. So a coding auditor overall is a medical professional who is able to ascertain the scope of an audit, use approved tools to perform the audit, compile the data, report the findings, and provide necessary recommendation and training. So again, you're not just auditing and forgetting about it. And one of the things that I have for you at the end of the episode today is going to be a call to action for both coders and auditors. And the one for auditors is also going to be to a call for managers as well. So determining the scope. So this is really, 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 really important to define the scope of the audit. I have some, just how I gave you guys some questions before, I wanted to make sure I gave you questions too. This is the partnership here, not just me talking, but critical thinking and going through all of these different processes. So these are the things that you need to ask yourself. If you're asked to do an audit, you need to know what is the goal. In order to determine the scope, what is the goal of that audit? What are you trying to determine? What are you trying to review? Okay. How are you going to obtain the information? Where are you going to need? Where do you need to go? Are you currently right now with this pandemic? Are you working remote? Do you need to go to the office? Is it going to be all electronically for you? And also, what resources do you have available? How are you going to present the results? And who are you going to present the results to? So one of the things that you need to know is who is requesting the audit. What are the questions that they have? That way, when you are selecting your sample or the type of audit that you're doing, then you will be able to address those questions. So overall, what is the ultimate goal that you have for completing the audit? Also, are we doing an internal audit, an external audit, or a peer review? And that's something that we need to understand. So an internal audit is one that is performed where? By a member of the organization. An external audit, this is when you get an individual or group from outside. So like a contractor. There are different companies. One of them is CMAS that does, audits for organizations. Or is this going to have to be a peer review audit? This is one that is performed by another provider. So when you're looking at things like medical necessity that is being questioned, and also review of clinical practices and policies that need to be reviewed to ensure whether or not they're being followed or not. You're not able to, as a coder, we don't know about the clinical practices, so we would need a peer review or another physician. You also need to ask yourself, is this going to be a random audit sample that I'm going to pull, or is this going to be a focus audit? So a random means there is a random selection of medical records that you're going to audit. A focus audit is one that focuses on one thing. So you're looking at one type of procedure or just one procedure. You're looking at one provider or specific things like modifier usage, incident to issues, cloning. That's only to just name a few. Also, is this going to be a prospective audit versus a retrospective audit? So what that means is prospective, this is before the claim has been submitted. Before the claim goes out, you're going to review it. Retrospective means the claim has already been submitted, has already been processed, so now you're reviewing it after the fact. So what type of audit are we doing? Retrospective or prospective? So what are the steps in the audit process? So the very first thing is to determine the scope. That's why I just gave you that list of questions. So again, in determining the scope, you need to know the type of services, like in a specific, for example, E&M code. Are we doing office, hospital, new versus established, a particular surgical procedure, consultation visits, as well as other. You need to know your patient population. Is it going to be based on payer? So when you're pulling your sample to audit. Are we doing only government payers? Are we doing one specific payer? Are we doing self-pay patients? Also the time frame, how far back are you going to go? Especially for retrospective audits, you need to know, is it going to be from last month? This is going to be from the last quarter, for example. The next step is to determine the sample that would be used for that final selection. Again, how many, you're not only knowing if you're doing a random sample, but also how many charts, how many claims are we reviewing? Are we reviewing one provider? Are we reviewing all providers? Are we reviewing a specific date and then just all of the charges or all of the services performed on that particular date? The date range too. Are we going to focus on a specific week, for example? The next step number 3, is going to be to determine what tools or resources are going to be required to complete the audit. So this is important that you determine this. What are you going to need before you even start? So what do you need? Do you need things like your coding books? Okay. Do you need audit tools, especially if you're doing like E&M? There are E&M audit tools. There's also surgical audit tools for E&M. Do you have your 95 and 97 and I hope guidelines? And I hope the answer is yes. For recording purposes of your findings, are you doing this electronically? Are you doing this on paper? What resources do you need? What tools do you need to have? Also, the policies, the office policies, the medical policies, and things like the OIG work plan, the fee schedules from the payer, bundling edits. So what tools do you need or resources that you're going to need for that audit that if you do not have, one, you have to obtain, and if you have, well, great, you already have them. The next step will be to obtain the documentation, the charts and the claims that you're going to audit. So get all of your documentation that you're going to audit, and guess what? You're going to get to perform the audit. So when performing audits, it is helpful to have worksheets. So when I was auditing my providers, I had, when we were doing E&M audits, I will have my E&M audit tool, and I would go through and I would say, okay, this is for this patient, this is for this one provider, and I will actually have all of my audit tools. Now, some of the audit tools we had electronically, some we actually had on paper, and some of our providers actually wanted to see, okay, so let me take a look at the components, let me take a look at the documentation, just, as a guide. So that is really helpful, and it's something that helps me, but, that might be, you might be doing something else. Once the audit is completed, though, you need to understand, and actually you should know how you're going to do that first. How are you going to communicate the audit results? So that's one of the things, once it's completed, are you going to give a report? I always gave my providers a report. I actually went and presented, this is the listing of the claims I had and gave some background information of the scope of the audit, the reason or intent for the audit, the audit findings, but also most importantly, I also included reference information and reference materials. Like if it was a guideline, if it was something from the payer, I would have that added on there as well. Yeah, sometimes it could be a couple of pages long, but as you have all of the detailed information there. And then you would be with the providers is how we gave them the results. Some providers said, oh, just send it to me. I want to review it before you even come to my office, then come in. Let me have you come in on this day. That way we can review it together. So now that you've determined that, now that you know the process of the audit, the next thing that you need to know is, and actually you needed to know this before the steps of the audit, is the type of audit that you are doing. Are you doing a risk audit? Are you doing a compliance audit? And we also talk about forensic audits. So a risk analysis audit, they're usually done internally and are self-directed. The purpose, it will help identify if the practice or organization has any particular compliance or if they pose a payment risk. So you're going to be looking at carrier coverage rules for the services that are being offered by your practice and organization. It is focused on contracted payers, making sure that, we keep in mind the rules for each one of the payers. Remember, every payer is their own individual company. So we have to keep in mind the individual payer rules and payer guidance for documentation, coding, and reimbursement. This type of audit, the risk analysis, is done at the provider level to determine how the practice is doing. And you could do this maybe for a new provider. When the new provider starts, I always did my new providers, I would meet with them, go over, they would have their EMR systems training first. Then they will meet with me. We will look at some examples and some of the audits that we've done before, and I would explain to them what the actual audit process was. How do we do how often they would be audited, what was the sample size, and so on and so forth. Also, claims per provider or coders, or claims per type of service. So when you're doing a risk analysis audit, you're looking at claims per provider or coder, because you have some offices where your providers are actually coding. In other offices, you might have, as the provider doesn't code, they said, listen, that this is not my specialty, my expertise. I'm going to defer this to you because you are more knowledgeable. I had a provider that said that to me. They said, I don't know the first thing about coding. I'm going to defer that to you. And I did meet with the provider multiple times, and, we talked about E&Ms. This was a pediatrician that I worked with, and, she got a hang of it a little bit. So you also are looking for the risk analysis audit of by different services too. You can look at those as well, not just per provider, but also by type of service, like I mentioned, the E&M claims. The next type of audit is compliance audit analysis. This is usually done by the payer. So if you're working on the payer side, this is something that you are doing. So after identifying in your billing data anything that suggests potential errors of non-compliance, the payer is going to conduct an audit to analyze that we are in adherence to their coverage rules as well as the internal policies that are in place. So the focus of this audit is very specific. It is usually on a specific payer, on a specific issue for which there is some belief or potential error. The objective for a compliance audit analysis can be focused on a particular provider, specific procedure, a certain group of procedures, and even also certain days of the week. So if that's something that you are doing at the provider level, that is going to be your objective. Remember the scope and what is the ultimate goal for the audit is what's going to drive your audit. Claims included generally involve those that have already been submitted for payment and have been paid. Again, this is usually done at the payer's level. The audit report for a compliance audit needs to include a complete detailed description of the basis of the alleged error, such as, what policy or part of the policy that was violated, also the facts on the records that suggested the error on the claim, detailed cause of any identified error and facts presented in the record, as well as the verification steps to ensure that all of the errors were identified, such as having a structure to validate that each criteria was analyzed. So how are you analyzing the data? Did you cover everything that needed to be covered? Also, the financial impact and what will be done, like, for example, a corrective action measure. Again, here's that word, training and education of providers and coders, as well as additional follow-up auditing. And this is where you get from auditing to now monitoring. The next type of audit is forensic audit analysis. This type of audit pertains to a legal process. It could be a commercial carrier or government post-payment audit. So this is also on the payer side. So they occurred in both sides for false claims and also DOJ criminal investigations. The auditor in this audit need to be able to apply the rules objectively. So you cannot be biased when you're conducting this audit if this is what you're doing. Forensic audits. On the provider side, the objective or the scope of the audit is already determined. So when the payer is doing this, they already are going to determine the objective or the scope. From the payer side, to determine the scope and objective, they need to consider very carefully because they will influence the validity of what they're looking to ensure that everything that it's included should have been included, if that makes sense. So you have to make sure, okay, what is the scope? What is the objective? So that I can then make sure that everything that I'm looking at in my audit is everything that I need to look at. I'm not leaving anything out, or I don't have anything in excess. The report for this type of audit should identify the detail of the alleged errors and also specific basis for the alleged error and the financial impact. So, for example, the coverage rule that alleged error applies to. So very, very important. I did some research of medical records and how they can be audited as well. And, you find different ways out there in the internet. I found this from medicalbuildersandcoders.com, which is a blog. They actually had a section for auditing and how it could be performed. So these are the steps that they suggest. Choose the focus of the audit is the first step. Second step, define measurement criteria. 3, determine which records to review. 4, decide the sample size. 5, develop record-keeping tools. 6, gather data. 7, summarize your findings. And number 8, analyze the data and implement appropriate changes. So everything that I said, just in like a little bit different order, maybe a little bit different headings. So you will find that when you're researching online how to conduct an audit. So once again, the steps of the audit, we need to determine the scope. So are we doing coding, billing, maybe other compliance issues? This is going to help identify the audit objectives. You can also do maybe incident to compliance or condition of payments, like plans of care. Determine the type of your audit, the sample selection, like your claims, your patients. This is going to be your primary sampling unit. You're going to perform the audit and report on those results. So I said towards the beginning, it wasn't at the very, very beginning, I had like a call to action for all my coders, all of my auditors, and also my managers. So coders, call to action. You're a coder. You're in your office. Do you know what is your coding accuracy? What is your percentage? Are you at 100% coding accuracy, 90, 95, 80, 85, 72%? What is your coding accuracy? What is your accuracy of your coding? That's very important. And this is going to tie to the next question I'm asking you. Does your organization have a minimum accuracy rate that you need to meet? If they do, are you meeting it? That's why that first question was so important. If you don't know, it's time to ask. The next question that I have for you is, are you being audited? If so, are you being provided with the results and the training about your findings? One of the things that I see is sometimes due to the lack of time, and here is my call to action for my managers, what I'm seeing because of the lack of time and resources, maybe you get audited. You don't get you don't get any reports. You don't get an actual report telling you what was found. What sometimes you might see are generalized statements of this is what we're seeing for everybody. Well, I want to know what my findings are, because 1, I know I'm not doing that. 2, I'm not doing that. 3, I don't know if I did that. 4, maybe, but you want to know what are your audit findings, because, if you come into the office day in and day out, and you don't know what your coding accuracy is, you don't know if you're being audited, you don't have any findings or anything in writing saying, you were audited on this date, you were audited on this date, these were your findings, or for this particular date of services. These are things that you need to know, guys. And if you do not know this information, it is time that you ask. You want to be proactive. You want to know this information. It is important. And sometimes in organizations, I've seen 99% coding rate, 95%. The lowest I saw was 92. So all of your organizations should have that. Now, my auditor call to action, and also my managers, my directors call to action. Are you auditing your new providers? Are you auditing your new coders, your new billers? If not, you might want to consider having a plan for your new providers. How often are you going to audit them once they start? Now, how often are you auditing the providers that are seasoned, that have been with you, that are not new? How often are you auditing your providers? How often are you auditing your coders? Are you conducting training on these findings? Does your organization have a minimum accuracy rate for coding? Do you know it? If you don't know, you need to ask. Are you reporting on these findings? You know, as an auditor, are you reporting on these findings, or are you conducting the audit, sending a report and then it's getting lost? What's going on with those findings that you have? Are we now training the staff? If you're training the staff, is this training being done in a timely manner? And if you answer no, or if you don't know, then this is the time where you have to say, okay, guys, what are the answers to these? Talk to your manager. Talk to your staff. Make sure everybody goes in every single day to work. Whether you are somebody that loves coding and you want to code for the rest of your life and you just love it, or whether you are somebody that loves coding, but you know what? You are thinking that in the next couple of months, the next couple of years, you do want to move up and become a manager, supervisor, go into auditing or go into compliance. We all have a responsibility in this industry. And these are things that we need to know. And we wake up every day, we go to work, and we have the best intentions. We want to make sure that we're doing our job correctly. But if I was taught incorrectly, or now, I'm being trained in the office by other coders, so the information is kind of like that telephone game, so do we have in the office an actual training to onboard new employees on how we do things, or to make sure, because you don't know what people know. So we can't assume that they know how to do everything. So are we auditing new providers? Are we auditing the new coders? Are we reporting and giving this information back to them? Are we training them so that they have the tools that they need to be successful within your organization, and also for the organization to be successful? So that's my call to action for my coders, my auditors, my directors, my supervisors, and my managers. And, if you don't have these things in place, these are things that you need to absolutely look into. So final thoughts here. I know it just sounded like, my final thoughts in the action, but auditing medical records can be very time consuming. I know it. I do it. I've done it. It's been one of those things that sometimes, you have so much. At one point, I had over 100 providers that I had to audit in a very little time. So, I was doing these 24/7 literally, but it is time consuming. But guys, the benefits are going to outweigh any negative thing that you can tell me about auditing medical records. It's going to outweigh it. I guarantee it. So depending on the objective, medical record audits can be performed either by an external agency, by an auditor, or just a coder that has been there for a long time that has been audited and they are able to code properly. Audits conducted by a third party are generally to review compliance, and internal audits are usually performed to evaluate current treatment processes and measures the quality of care. The reason for performing a coding documentation audit, again, is for compliance. An annual review of your practice coding and documentation is recommended by who? Not by who, but recommended by the OIG. When I said who, I was talking about who as the person, not the organization. It is recommended by the OIG, the Office of Inspector General. And this is part of having an effective compliance program. So that's when I got the request about doing audit, I'm like, absolutely, audit and compliance, they, go hand in hand. So a coding audit can help ensure that we are receiving appropriate reimbursement for all services that we provide in our office or that our doctors provide. In addition, a coding audit will help identify areas of risk leading to over and under coding and documentation, ensure that your coding practices are compliant or are in compliance with the regulations that are set forth by private and government payers. Teach, here is that word again, teach our providers and staff how to use documentation and maintain compliance for proper reimbursement. So you hear that training and education is so important. Now, in the OIG's website, the OIG, the Office for Inspector General or Office of Inspector General, they provide a free, yes, you heard it right, a free downloadable software. And if you don't know, like I say on the announcement, you need to know, it is known as RATStats. RATSTATS. Okay, so if you want to, want a better method to determine those outliers, I'd recommend going to the OIG's website. So it's oig.hhs.gov. And then you have your /compliance/RATStats index. But I will have the link in the episode description. And also it would be, I will have all of my references on there. But please, guys, I said it in the compliance episode. We all have a great responsibility. We are all responsible. So I want you to start asking those questions because I know that you want to do your job correctly for yourself, for your own improvement, and for the organization. So thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode, this month's episode, and I will catch you on our next one. Thank you all so much and have a blessed day.